Welcome to Work from the Inside Out, a podcast that highlights real-life stories, practical strategies, and best practices for transitioning your career from unhappiness and dissatisfaction to fulfillment, meaning, and joy. Now here is your host, career and executive coach, Tammy Guler-Loeb.
Hey everybody. I am so excited to introduce my guest today, Dr. Dawn Graham. Dr. Graham is a career switch coach, TEDx speaker, LinkedIn learning instructor, and host of the popular call-in show, Dr. Dawn on Careers on Sirius XM Radio. That's channel 132. She is also a regular contributor to Forbes.com under the Leadership Channel and the career director for the Executive MBA program at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. Her latest book, which I must say I love, is called Switchers: How Smart Professionals Change Careers and Seize Success. It combines her experience as a career coach, licensed psychologist, and former corporate recruiter to give career switchers the strategies to break through obstacles and land the job they want. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Dawn Graham. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Tammy. I'm excited to be here.
I am so excited to have you. I'm a huge fan, and a lot of what's in your book, Switchers, and a lot of the work that you're doing across the board, it's so closely aligned with the kinds of things I do, but it's also, I think, the nature of the way that you do it and the way that you talk about careers and the way you encourage people to really take ownership of their own careers. I just really appreciate it. But here on Work from the Inside Out, we like to start with our guests to learn a little bit about where you came from, where you began, your formative years, or what were some of the early parts of your career. Where did you begin, and how might some of that shaped where you are today? Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, first off, thank you so much for saying that about switchers. And I would say that the book emerged from a negative career experience. And it was, I think a lot of people find their calling in life from things that they didn't expect or unusual detours. And that's how I got into this. So I was working with Arthur Andersen. For many of you may remember the Enron scandal. There's, I think, a few movies, maybe a book if you want to catch up. But it was tough. It was tough to have worked really hard. At that point, I had a master's degree. I had just taken on a new role, and I was doing everything right, but still got laid off along with tens of thousands of others during that time. And I think it was my first wake-up call that there's no such thing as job security, and that we have to build that within us. And it's not just about skills. There's a number of other things that it's about. It's about your brand. It's about your network. And as kind of CEOs of our own careers and our own futures, we cannot predict what is going to happen. Even if we're going along, things are smooth. Obviously, nobody could predict the pandemic. There are things that's going to happen in the market the longer you're in a field that are going to be detours. And what I strive to do with my book Switchers, as well as the other avenues where I publish content, is to help people build this job security within themselves and recognize how to navigate these changes so that they never feel stuck.
Right. This is exactly what I've been trying to tell people. And yet I find, and maybe you'll concur with this, that it seems like many of us, though, were raised with some kind of a belief system about once you get your foot in the door with some kind of an apparently stable company or organization, that we're all set for a while, or we can kind of rest and just work hard and take a paycheck. And, nothing wrong with hard work, but we don't have to worry too much. I think lately, maybe people are a little bit more tuned in to the fact that things aren't as secure, but I still hear people say, all I want is a full-time job with benefits and I'll be all set. And I don't think that's true anymore.
Yeah, and I my goal isn't to have people worry, although I recognize that part of creating an insurance plan for yourself is the recognition that things may not always turn out the way you want. But I think that's the exact thing that makes people not worry, is when you've built a strong network, when you're growing your skills, branching outside the knowledge that you have today, and building a brand as a strong worker who is reliable and cooperates with other people, then you're always going to have opportunities that are available for you. And but I get it. We all are stressed between raising families, working tough jobs, trying to have some kind of life in between. And it's tough. It's tough to say, all right, I'm going to carve some time to learn a new skill, or it's tough to say, I'm going to, attend regular networking events to build my group of connections, because, it's like anything else. It's just an extra thing to do. So I think one of the things that I try and coach people on is to take advantage of those opportunities that are already in front of you, which can help you do those things without necessarily adding too much or layering too much on top of it that you may not have time for. But if you don't do it, chances are good that whether it's a change in the market or industry, or your current company, or your leadership in your company, or a pandemic, insert challenge here. It's really difficult to get through a professional career today without some kind of detour. And I'd much rather people be ready for that, or even implement it on their own versus being forced to, because that never feels good.
Right. No, I agree. I think, better to have, to be in control of making those changes than to feel like something's happened out of your control. Although, there are things that happen in life like that. I want to go back just for a moment, not to revisit a negative experience, but more for a learning point. So you had a master's degree, you were hired by Arthur Andersen. So you're in this, from what I recall of anybody I know who worked there, it was a completely intense kind of, management consulting experience, and you got laid off. What did you do from there? Or how did you process that? Or what were the next steps that you took from there out of that experience?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, I did all the wrong things.
Tell us what you learned from that then.
Exactly. I did all the wrong things. And that's why I'm in this field today, because in a lot of ways, I just prolonged my misery. Of course, anybody's going to be startled by an experience like that.
Of course,
But, I did the online applications. I didn't network. I'm an introvert by nature. And I just believed that doing great work was enough. But now every single one of my colleagues was in the same position as me. They were all laid off. So the people I probably would have leaned on were not available to help me because they were trying to deal with their own situation. The other thing that I think people don't realize is that having Arthur Andersen in your brand, which, yes, it was an intense company. I loved every minute of it, and I thought I'd be there for my entire life. So that changed my obviously my future, but in good ways. It's not. Yeah. It was certainly a negative experience then, but today I look at it as the chapter that pointed me in the right direction.
Absolutely.
So there's a lot of positives, but I the brand of Arthur Andersen being on your resume at the time was not a positive one. Everybody, assumed you were part of it and assumed you had the same ethics. And so here I am with, strong skills in a company that doesn't exist anymore, with a network that can't help me, and a brand on my resume that is actually perceived, 2 months earlier it was perceived as one of the best things ever. Now it was perceived as a negative. And so I applied online. I didn't talk to people. I was ashamed. Obviously this was a very public situation. Right. So it's not that people didn't know what happened, but still, you really do take it personally. And I really thought I might have to move home. I was in the middle of a divorce, and I had
Oh,
a
wow. So
lot
you
of
had a
expenses.
lot going. I mean, so you
Yeah, when
had,
it rains, it pours.
I don't want to take that lightly either. Just to pause for a second, that's, to lose your job and to be going through a divorce at the same time, that's just traumatic. That's deeply
Yes.
deep. I mean, you're a psychologist, so you know what I'm talking about. That talk about turning points. That's like a 360 times two.
Yeah, it was traumatic. And I wasn't a psychologist at that point, but I think in part why I went on to get that credential is because I really realized after coming out of that, not in the moment, it took me
Yeah.
months and months of
Sure.
I went to, I went to the local restaurant to get a job as a server, and because I have to live,
Yeah.
I think I've actually worked in a lot of restaurants in my life and early careers. And I think it's one of the best jobs you can have to really learn how to deal with people and customers. But at the time, I was thinking to myself, wow, how did my situation change so drastically in just a matter of weeks? And you don't think it can happen to you, but then
Yeah.
here it is. So fortunately, I took the time to reflect. I had some good friends and obviously good family, and I didn't move back home, but
Yeah.
I earned some money doing contract type work and eventually got a job in outplacement, which I didn't even realize existed at the time,
Mhm.
and felt like this is it. This is the combination of my recruiting skills, my personal experience of going through a layoff, and recognizing that careers are so intertwined with our identity, that psychology piece is so important. And when I started really thinking about going back to school to bring that piece into the mix, but I know that pain, I know that fear, and it was something I never wanted to feel again. And if I could create a situation where others didn't have to experience that, that's what I wanted to do.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious just about the sort of time frame between the time you were laid off and then it sounds like you were just trying to kind of keep the boat floating, so to speak. And then you started working in outplacement. What was the sort of time frame in which
Well,
that
and the
all happened?
outplacement was contract work, so it wasn't steady. So I was still doing other things. I
Oh,
was
you
kind
were.
of like a lot of people are doing today. I was kind of cobbling a lot of things together. It's like, okay, I might get called to do an outplacement training next week, or I might not. And so it was probably about a year and a half between
Okay.
the time I got laid off and I was doing all of these, like I said, side projects,
Hmm.
contract work, gigs, all of this,
Yeah.
doing things that actually I like, I don't even know if I could do this, but I need the money. And then I decided to go back to graduate school. So in 2003, I moved to go to start my doctorate in psychology. But I really look at that year and a half as a gift, because I think one of the mistakes I made and a lot of people make out of fear is I have to get a job right away, and it has to be like something similar. And
Right.
because I couldn't, and I'll just be honest with you, I couldn't. I applied, and I wasn't using my network, and so I wasn't really helping myself in that respect. That it gave me that year and a half to really struggle and learn. Like, I wouldn't have known about outplacement had I not had that opportunity. So I'm grateful for that time now. But for
Yeah.
the people who are in it,
Yeah.
I feel that fear around ambiguity, around, is it always going to be like this? Is it over in my
Yeah.
career? I mean, it was all those thoughts in my head,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
they're terrible thoughts, but
Of
we do
course.
this to ourselves.
Well, but now, of course, hindsight being 2020, but I mean, yeah, it's an interesting paradox though to think about going through such a painful, difficult time and yet thinking about now how much good actually has come out of that because of that struggle and all that you learned during that time, you actually ended up making some very good decisions along the way. You made some maybe not great decisions initially, but you were also, under a tremendous amount of stress. And also I think what you did is what a lot of people do. they had let a lot of their network go. They don't even think to network. They start looking online, thinking that's where all the jobs are. I hear this all the time, even when I've told clients, don't look online for all the jobs. That's not where they all are. And then they come to me and they say, I was looking and I didn't see much. And I say, well, where were you looking? Well, I was on Indeed and this and that. I say, I thought we talked about that the other day. You got to be talking to people. So it's interesting. And I'm glad you brought up the whole notion of introverts, because you talk about that in Switchers as well, about that being an introvert can actually be an advantage in some ways in terms of networking. And we'll get to that in a little bit, but I just wanted to pin that for a moment. So clearly out of the struggle and sort of cobbling things together, which I admire that too, because I think some people would have thrown in the towel and moved home and just kind of let themselves almost surrender to it. It sounds like you were a fighter in some ways too. You fought through it. You made sure that you were still out there. You were still out there in the world doing things and interacting and making money. And clearly there was some soul searching that must have happened during that time. And you applied to school and decided to go get your doctorate, right?
Yes. And I feel fortunate for that time, because you certainly you certainly could do it while you're working, but a lot of us don't, because we're distracted by general life, work, and, just trying to get through the day. So I was grateful for that time. And I obviously processed a lot during my doctoral program, because as a counseling psychologist, part of it is not only doing therapy, but going to therapy and learning a lot about how the brain works and, messages we send ourselves and experiences and how you interpret things. And so it really helped me make sense of a lot that I had gone through in that year and a half. And I was like, wow, I needed this. It was almost like a 4-year course of therapy, and I did need it. And I did learn a lot about not only my experiences, how our career and our identity, especially in the US, is so intertwined.
Yeah.
That's part of it. I actually did my dissertation on that, how extroverts and introverts network in the job search differently. But when you're unemployed, it's a different type of shame, I guess is the best word. When you're an introvert, maybe you don't get your energy from working with, people out and about and all this stuff. But when you're laid off, it's really about that you don't want to be vulnerable. You don't want to look as if, you did something wrong, and you didn't do something wrong. I mean, this is all the messages we have in our head, but it's really difficult in that situation, especially the longer you are without a job, to network. And I get that. And it's really easy for me or you or other coaches to say, just network, but it's not about the action. It's about the feelings that come with that.
That's right. I totally agree. And I sympathize with that completely. And we do have to be tuned into that. I'm curious what your thoughts are on this. Well, I have two questions. The first one is, when you started your doctoral program, did you know that you wanted to go into the direction of helping people with their careers, or is that something that kind of developed as you were? Because I know you did your dissertation related to networking, but I'm curious if you were thinking that you were going to head in that direction.
100% knew it, 100%. And, interestingly, there were 6 people in my cohort, my doctoral cohort, and they all disliked career. They thought it was boring. And they're like, you take all the career stuff. So I was in heaven, because anything that came in terms of like a project or related to career stuff, I was all over it. And they're like, good, you take it. So it worked out great. And I picked a school based on that, because I really knew at that time that's what I wanted to focus on.
Oh, that's great. That's great. So the other question was, given that in the last, and I don't mean, we are recording this while we are still somewhat immersed in the pandemic, but even prior to that, it seems to me that layoffs have become, I think, more of a norm. They happen more frequently than they used to. And I'm curious what your thought is on this. I understand that a lot of people who've been laid off still feel that shame. It affects their self-esteem, especially when they've been blindsided by it and they didn't even know it was coming. And even when they knew it was coming, it's very difficult. But I'm curious what you think. Because those kinds of things do happen more often than they used to, has some of the stigma dissipated a little bit? Are employers a little more understanding? Are some people that you're talking to maybe not letting it get to them as much? What's your thought on that?
So I would say I haven't seen major changes yet. I think there was a lot of optimism around the pandemic creating a situation where employers would be more understanding around these gaps. And I do think it has brought an awareness because, a lot of the people who hire now had that situation of their own.
Yeah.
And I've seen articles around the fact that, if somebody chooses to take a break, whether that's a personal choice or a professional choice or not even their choice, like what business is it of an HR team or a hiring manager? The fact is you're not good if you're not working 24/7, 12 months a year for the 50 years. People take breaks. People have other priorities for a period of time. And I think what HR departments are starting to realize is that, it's actually not my business to ask what were you doing for these 6 months, because it could be something very personal or
Right.
family related. And,
Right.
can we not have any gap on our resume once
Right.
we hit the job market? Because that's
Right.
really depressing.
Right.
That said, there's a lot of studies out there on long-term unemployment and
Yeah.
how, research that shows that, once somebody kind of hits that 6-month mark, that it becomes even harder and that companies would be more willing to hire somebody who doesn't have the right experience but hasn't been unemployed, instead of the person who has the great experience that's a match and is unemployed. And so that bias, we're humans, and humans have a really hard time putting aside that bias. So I think that's why people get so afraid, because like, what if I, don't find something in the short term, or they worry, do I have to take less money? And it is a very stressful time, and people tend not to share it because even though it's not their fault, and I would tell anyone, if you're going to be in a career for a period of time, you will probably experience one or more layoffs, and ask anybody. Me, I've been laid off twice. Arthur Andersen's the one that people know about for the most part, because I talk about it a lot, but it happens.
Yeah.
It happens. And if it hasn't happened to you, not that I want to scare you, but it might just be a matter of time. So think about that and think about how ready you are should that happen.
Yeah, I think you're making some excellent points. I know I've actually done some work with Ofer Sharon, who's written extensively about long-term unemployment and exactly the kinds of things you're talking about. And I think that there are people out there who have enjoyed, decades of very solid careers. And I think the more unsteady that the marketplace has been in terms of how companies hire people and just hiring practices in general, that people really do need to be, I'd say, almost not braced in a state of fear, but just better prepared for some of those fluctuations. And I think, you started off, saying earlier, you said there's no such thing as job security. I totally agree with that, but not to scare people, but more to say, you really do need to be in charge of your own career in that way. It's very important. Thank you for sharing your story too. I think it's very helpful for people to see that a lot of your work comes from your own experience and how you've taken that forward. So when you finished your doctorate, where did you go from there? How did things evolve for you?
Yeah, so I knew I wanted to be back in the business world. That's kind of where I was comfortable at the time. And so I had I learned my lesson. I started networking a year before I finished the program and picked the companies that I knew I wanted to work in, started making connections in those companies and talking about when I was going to graduate and what my time frame was. And so I definitely did a much better job at the job search this time. And I ended up working as a psychologist, an organizational psychologist in an organization doing selection assessment, leadership assessment, transitions in different ways, maybe within their organization or to a new organization. And, so I've kind of kept that thread throughout my career in one way or one form or fashion. And I think the career world is really changing too. And I'm excited about some of the things that are happening perhaps as a result of the pandemic, but I think things that would have happened anyway, but maybe just were accelerated by the pandemic, which are, companies are starting to think about terms like upskilling and reskilling and recognizing that, well, hey, maybe we don't have to lay off this group of people because we're not using that product anymore. Maybe we can retrain them in an area that is growing. Mm-hmm. And there's companies doing internal talent mobility work to really understand what a person brings to the table, whether it's skills within their current job or just skills they have, but they're not using, to see where they can move around inside the organization. So I think companies are recognizing that they need to look at talent more holistically and not just, okay, that project's done, you're out. No, we want to bring in the next person, because unfortunately, with how fast the market's changing, the talent for the areas that are growing so quickly isn't necessarily there. And companies are starting to recognize that they need to be involved in building that talent. And that's a good thing, I think, for many.
Yeah, it's very encouraging to hear. I've also seen a number of companies that are also starting things like returnships. So I think it's designed primarily for, parents who may have stayed at home with young children for several years, who had, a very full career before they decided to stay home for a few years, or maybe they were home, maybe not with children, but maybe took care of an elderly parent or something, but they took a few years. I wouldn't say they took them off, because
no.
If anything, I think staying home with kids is harder work than going to a job.
Well, LinkedIn just added that to their skills, stay-at-home parent, because they're like, you know what, this needs to be in our skills. This is a hard job.
It is. I mean, and I talk to people all the time who say, oh, well, that doesn't count. I haven't worked in years. And I'm thinking, oh, yes, you have.
Oh, yes.
Absolutely. So, but it's nice to see that some of these things are getting more folded in. It's great to see that. But now you're at Wharton. That's really your kind of, would we say, your full-time gig?
It is a full-time job. I'm the director for the executive MBAs, and I'm responsible for 240 executive MBAs who are all working full-time as well as going to school full-time. And what's interesting about my role is that the executive MBA program for most schools used to be a program that was a place to go to kind of bolster your skills and advance in your company. But more and more over the past decade, it's become a place to make a career switch. And so we have people coming from all industries, medical doctors, lawyers, people who are PhDs, scientists, engineers, who are coming back to do something different. And that's exciting. And that is kind of the basis of where I got the idea for my book, because I realized there's so many people mid-career who are interested in making a change for a number of reasons. Sometimes their industry is going away. Other times they just maybe got on the wrong ladder early on, or there's so many exciting new industries coming out that people are like, wow, I want to do that, not this. So lots of reasons for that.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And then you also have your radio show on Sirius XM. How did that come about?
So that actually, that's interesting. Yeah, it originally came about because SiriusXM had a business channel, and they contracted with Wharton to have their faculty be the hosts of the business shows that were related to the work they did. So there's a marketing show by a marketing professor, a leadership show, and all these things. And I realized after I got into Wharton that there wasn't a career show. And I said, you guys need a career show. And they said, all right, we'll give you a 6-session special. And if it goes well, we'll keep it. So yeah, you want to talk about a live audition on national radio and having no experience being a radio host. That was a scary first 6 weeks, but it worked out. And now it's one of my favorite hours of the week.
And what's years. And you've been doing that for a couple of years, almost 6 years?
Mm-hmm.
Oh my goodness. I didn't realize it was that long. Okay. And what's the format of that show? If people want to tune in, what could they expect from that?
Yeah, so it's SiriusXM 132, and it's a call-in career show. So if you want to call in and ask questions, that's really what we're there for. And that's kind of the core of our show. We often bring on other experts, to help with a specific topic, but yeah, it's pretty much a call-in show. So if you don't have access to a career coach, but you have a career question, you can call us up every Thursday, noon Eastern, and we will answer it. So it's very fun. Mm-hmm.
That's great. That's wonderful. And then you're teaching for LinkedIn Learning. What kinds of courses could people find on LinkedIn Learning from you?
Yes, this won't be a surprise. They're career courses. I'm consistent, if nothing else. But yeah, so I've done 4 courses with LinkedIn, which has been a blast. They are a great company to work with, and they're super professional. So these courses are great.
Yeah.
And so of course I had to do one on my book, Switchers. So there's one
absolutely
your career. And then the most popular one is getting into the mind of the hiring manager, and that is really putting my psychology hat on and really helping people understand the psychology behind the job search and the interview process, and kind of how to use that to get a little bit of an advantage. So that's been a really popular one. But I also have courses on how likability can really boost your career, visibility, which aligns with brand. And, you may be great in your work, but if people don't know about it, then you may not be getting the opportunities. So how to be more visible, even if you're somebody like me who tends to be an introvert.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's go there for a moment, because you do cover that in your book, Switchers. You talk about introverts and how they can really benefit. Actually, they can make the most of networking in some respects. But actually, why don't we start for a moment? Just give us some broad brushstrokes about what Switchers is about.
Sure. So I wrote Switchers because I found that there are a ton of great career books on the shelves. There are a ton of great books that were dedicated to exploring a career change, but there wasn't a single book that said, okay, now I figured out I want to make this big transition. How do I get there? Because we know the traditional processes don't work as well for switchers, because the switcher needs to do a lot of rebranding and reworking so that they can convince a hiring manager to roll the dice on them. So this book is an end-to-end roadmap for if you're looking to make a functional switch, an industry switch, or both, how to plan that out and map that out to have the greatest chances of landing that job, that role that you really want. So that's really where Switchers has that niche spot in the market.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, I can put I love this book, and it really does give the reader, I would say, soup to nuts, everything they could need to be thinking about how they're going to go through that process. I mean, I'm a big proponent of not doing any of this alone. I'm not saying that you have to hire a coach necessarily, but I think that there's always something to be said for having somebody else to talk things through with, getting other ideas, right? And I think that you can do that through networking. And, what is networking? Networking is having a conversation with another person, getting more information, following up on that information. It doesn't have to be running around to events and shaking hands and kissing babies, right? But
Can't be now. We can't do anything.
No, and introverts would hate that anyway, right? Introverts are much better at, the one-on-one or small group, a more meaningful conversation. And so I think that it's a real misnomer. And I think you write about this. Introverts are good at networking. They just have to know what suits them best, right?
It's really true. Actually, one of the things that builds a relationship faster than anything else is having the person you're with feel heard. And introverts are great at listening. And somebody could walk away from a conversation having basically talked the whole time and feel really good about that other person because they listened. They genuinely listened. The other thing that really helps is having something in common. And I think that, the pandemic is a great example. We all have that in common. So if you start thinking about what can we talk about that's related to whether it's the pandemic and having to homeschool children, or whether it's, a loss of your job, there's so many things that can kind of bond people, and it doesn't, and quite frankly, isn't as helpful to do it in a big room if all you do is collect business cards and, link in with them and never do anything with that information.
Yeah, totally. And the other thing that you offer in the book that I think is really useful is you offer people even some sample scripts of things that they can say or even write in a note to somebody in a lot of different scenarios. You give a lot you really help people do the thinking so that, because I think one of the things that's difficult, especially if you've just lost a job, or if you're just starting out with the process of making a change, is, getting that little bit of that running start. And I think what I like is all the examples that you give in the book of just, here's a great way to frame this or how to say this. And I think a lot of people just need that, a little something to get them started. I also like, towards the beginning of the book, you have a questionnaire that people can take. Are you a career switched, how tolerant would you be of a career switch? And I think that would give somebody a level of kind of self-awareness of how ready are they? Where are they in that process? And, I think that might help somebody further discern, to what degree are they really looking to make a switch? Because I've seen situations where people might think that they need to leave a job when in fact, maybe they just need to have one of those, difficult conversations with their boss, or they need to ask for something they need at work and make some adjustments at work. And they actually aren't really ready to leave, but they just haven't known how to have those conversations. And they think that they have to change everything. I think a lot of people think in these sort of all or nothing terms, when in fact there are some incremental things that people can do sometimes. And I just think that this book really gives people a lot of options and ways of thinking those things through. It's wonderful. And you even, I think you also steer people in the direction of, things to not do, like you point to the top five job search killers, like here's what not to do. Don't do this at home, folks. And really, you lay it all out so clearly, and it's organized in such a way that if somebody even wants to just open the book up and read one chapter, they're going to get something really valuable. They don't have to read the entire book to get something. If there's a particular area that they really need to learn something about, it's a resource. It's not necessarily has to be read from cover to cover all at once.
Well, yeah. And thank you for that synopsis. And I would say, it's one thing that's a differentiator about my book is it's a very practical guide. There's certainly a lot of examples, because I don't want you wasting your time on things that are, like, let's just take care of this and we can focus on the hard stuff. Yeah. But there's examples, but not a lot of stories. And I find that stories are my weak point to some extent, but I didn't want to create a book that was like, here's how Tammy did it. Here's how Dawn did it. Because while I think those stories are great and inspiring and helpful, really focused on making this almost like a workbook and so if that's not your thing, I should just tell you that's what it's like. It's not that dry, but I really wanted to take the space and use it for things that somebody could take and apply to themselves right now, not something that somebody had to kind of dig through and figure out like what's the key point here. And so you're right. The book is very practical. It's very tactical. I encourage people, if you're thinking about the audiobook or the hardcover Kindle, I really push you towards the hardcover Kindle, because if you're really ready to make a switch, I would really want you to use this as a workbook to help you get there so you can apply it to your situation.
And I want to say that you do offer, not to disagree with you here, Dawn, okay? But I will say that you do offer some good scenarios, real life stories and scenarios in here of examples of things that you're trying to sort of reinforce. So even though you're not going into full-fledged stories of people, you do give people enough of a scenario to sort of say, here's what I'm talking about.
Right.
I'm giving you enough of an example so that that this isn't just an academic exercise. These are real things that really work for people.
Yeah, and they're real people. And you're absolutely right. I'm so glad you did say that, Tammy, because anyone who picks up the book, the first 2 pages are a full story, and people are going to say, "What the heck are you talking about? Tell me there's no stories." Yeah. Yes, there are stories but here's the thing: the stories are real. These are real people. Obviously, the names have been changed.
Yeah,
these are real situations, and I think they're relatable stories too. I don't think.
Yeah.
They show the good, the bad, and the ugly, and that's the reality of making a career switch, is that there are hurdles, and it's not necessarily a straight shot. You make some mistakes along the way.
That's one of the chapters, actually.
Yeah.
And I want to read this line because I know we're going to have to wrap up in a minute here. I love this line. It's you say, "Few things in life are truly have-tos. When you choose to do something, it is a lot more empowering." And I think that's the other piece that's really key here, is that we have to remind people that nobody's forcing you to do this. If you're really looking to find a situation that's going to be more meaningful or fulfilling or satisfying to you, there are lots of things in this book and on this podcast and on Dawn's radio show, and in her articles and in her LinkedIn Learning. There are lots of resources available to you to give you the tools, the inspiration, and all kinds of things that will help you to get there. But just understand this: it's a choice. And there's some hard parts, but there's also, I think some rewards that come along with it. And there really is a lot of opportunity that comes along with it. And I wish we could go through every chapter of this book because I love it that much. But for now, I would just ask you one more question. Actually, I'm going to ask you 2 more questions. The first one is, if you just had to give somebody, let's say, one key piece of advice, if they were starting out and thinking about making a transition in their career, what would be the first key piece of advice you would give them?
I would say follow your fear. And what I mean by that is not to get into dangerous situations, but to move towards those things that are hard and scary and unknown, because that's how you're going to build that muscle of taking on new challenges. And usually if something's a little bit scary, that's a good sign. It's a growth area. And unfortunately, our brain can get in the way by talking us out of it. So don't let it.
I love that. I'll add to that and say, oftentimes that kind of fear is also very, very similar or almost parallel to the feeling of excitement, because fear and excitement can feel like the same thing. And I think what you're pointing to is that's a clue that you're heading towards something you really want for yourself, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So what are the best ways for people to find you other than in the show notes for this show?
Yeah. So certainly you can find me on LinkedIn, and pretty easy to find. Just send me a personalized note to let me know where you heard me. And then My website is drdononcareers.com, and it's a repository of everything I've done. I've made it free. So even if you don't have a SiriusXM subscription, I podcast that and put it on my website. It's also on iTunes. So I recognize that not everybody has that subscription. I want to make that content available. So my articles on Forbes, everything's there, and it's all free. And if you are looking to make a change in your career, please learn from my mistakes and all of the years I've put into trying to figure out the formula to move forward, because I really want people to have access to it and to not feel stuck.
And on that beautiful note, I'm going to say thank you so much. This has been wonderful. I'm just so excited that I had a chance to talk with you and talk about your book, Switchers, How Smart Professionals Change Careers and Seize Success. I just can't say enough about it. It's a book that most people should have and read. So thank you again, Dr. Dawn Graham.
Thank you, Tammy.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Dawn Graham. It was so interesting to speak with her to learn about her professional journey. She has been a long-time inspiration of mine professionally. What is your key takeaway from our interview? If you are interested in any of the resources or links mentioned in today's podcast, you can find them on the blog page of my website at tammygulerloeb.com. Just look for episode 138. Are you anticipating your next professional move? Do you feel maybe a little stuck? Stay tuned for my new book, Work from the Inside Out, Break Through 9 Common Obstacles to Design a Career That Fulfills You. It will be available in September 2021 in both print and digital ebook editions through my website, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and independent bookstores. And in fact, Dr. Dawn Graham has generously endorsed my book. If you were inspired by this episode with Dr. Dawn, please share it with your friends and colleagues. And please do subscribe so you don't miss next week's show. Remember, subscribing is always free. Are you enjoying the podcast? I'd love to read your review on Apple Podcasts. It's easy to find through my website at tammygulerloeb.com/podcast. Just click on the Apple Podcast button and follow the instructions provided there. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, it's never too late or too impossible to increase your sense of fulfillment and satisfaction in your work and other meaningful activities. Let me know how it's going for you. Drop me a line. I'd love to hear from you. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to the Work from the Inside Out podcast. For more information, you can find us at www.workfromtheinsideout.com.